Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning into this podcast episode. Today, we are talking about child abuse organizations that oversee some child abuse advocacy plans, as well as policies and some issues that are going on in Texas. So, I'm going to kick it off to you, Warfield, to see if you have anything right off the top that you kind of want to lay out for us.
Actually, thank you. I do. Many decades ago, I actually started my master's in public administration. And one of the classes I took was the statistics class. And in that, I was trying to prove that child abuse, their demographics didn't affect child abuse. It happened across the board. And as we were getting ready for this, and of course in that class, I tried to lay out statistics that showed that, there's no correlation to, one group of people, whether it be poverty, race, cultural, was more inclined to abuse children or have children that were abused than anybody else. And it was pretty on target to my original beliefs. Of course, when you start a study and you have preconceived notions, you have to be real careful how you administer the study. But I think I kept it pretty neutral. So when we started looking for this topic or started, looking into this topic, I found something that, of course, hit right back at home to my attempt at academic studies in the 1990s. And this is from the National Institute for Children's Health Quality, and it's basically from their homepage. No, it's from an article. Did you know childhood trauma affects nearly half of American children? Now, that's a pretty dramatic statement to begin with.
I am part of that one half. Okay.
Hey, wait a minute.
Just kidding.
Anyway, and there's a paragraph in here that just went right back to what I was studying, and it says, an early childhood trauma collaborative and innovation network is addressing this issue. Oh, wait, back up one paragraph. Early childhood trauma transcends economic, cultural, and racial demographics. It can happen to anyone regardless of their background, says Project Director Colleen Murphy. In our efforts to improve early childhood systems and achieve health equity, we need to acknowledge trauma as a critical social determinant of children's health. That's a very broad statement, but it kind of leads to what we're looking at. Now, we're going to be a little bit more closer to home. We'll talk about some statistics for Dallas and Tarrant and some of the initiatives going on in these two counties. But, this is from a national viewpoint. But we have a problem in this country. And children are anywhere from just generally neglected to physically abused, sexually abused, and we don't put enough resources to this. We talk about, what is, our primary concerns for our country. Protecting our children, the most innocent, should be one of them. I mean, we don't have a future without our children, and no matter what you think about jobs or the economy, they're important. But if we don't do stuff for our children, all that goes by the wayside in the long run.
Mm-hmm. And so I want to give some statistics over the past, since 2014, some statistics of some of the issues that are highlighted with child population or reports of child abuse and neglect. So this is from about 2014 to 2019, and this is from dfps.state.texas, which I am trying to see what exactly DFPS. Oh, Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. Got it. Okay. So, so basically, over from the course of 2014 to 2019, it looks like the number of investigated child fatalities ranges from about 797 and then goes up to 807 at the highest point of investigated child fatalities, and then goes down to 772 in 2019. And then the number of fatalities where abuse/neglect was confirmed, in 2014 there was 151, and then over the 5 years up until 2019, that number just increases to 235. And then the child fatality rate per 100,000 children, 2.1 in 2014, and 3.16 rising over the course of 5 years in 2019. So basically what these numbers show is that the number of investigated child fatalities is increasing, and the number of fatalities where abuse and neglected was confirmed is also increasing. So this is something that we wanted to highlight to kind of give some background context if whether or not this is an issue or if we're just catastrophizing it. I don't know if that's the right word. Or if we're just picking at one topic and trying to over analyze it. But yeah, basically these are just statistics showing that this is a rising issue in Texas.
And then to follow up to that, I've got something from an organization called Fort Worth Report, and they have an article in Texas, children under 4 are most at risk of dying from abuse or neglect. Then they talk about early connections can help, and they're talking about finding ways to help prevent it, because where most child abuse reports come from are from outside the abusive situation, whether it be another family member, a teacher, another organization, daycare, things of this nature. But children under 4, under 3 are not necessarily out in the public yet. A lot of them haven't started daycare, or they're too young really to talk about what's going on at home if they're in daycare at 2 and 3. So this article tries to address the importance of finding ways to get people, under 3 and 4 in this age group, how do we protect them? And so, bear with me here a second. There's an organization called Lena Pope where this is from this article from fortworthreport.org. They're offering opportunities for people. It says kids can start early learning classes as young as 6 weeks of age. Now, honestly, I grew up in an era where we really didn't go to anything until kindergarten at the earliest, and most kindergartens were at your church or some other organization. They weren't in the public schools yet, so we really didn't start dealing with the public until 6. So when you start talking about 6 weeks of age for early learning classes, that's a bit much for me, I'll be honest. But they're saying it's part of a larger effort by the organization to be involved in every step of a child's development. Do we need to be that far along? I don't know. I honestly don't know. But in situations, will this help? Well, that's, to be seen. But the article goes on to say part of that is not only teaching children how to manage their emotions, how to identify feelings, and how to communicate with adults about concerns, but also about building a relationship with parents, which they're saying is critical for success. There was a program by an organization called Momentous Institute, and I don't know if it's still going on, where they were taking kids that had behavioral problems in school. And we're talking 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 3-year-olds that had behavioral problems in daycare. And they were trying to assess, why these kids were having behavioral problems at these early ages. Part of the reason was because these kids had experienced trauma at 1, 2, and 3 years old. So you've got to look at this and say, where do we find this? And this goes back to, at this point in time, we're really relying on family members to police family members. And in some ways it should be that way. We can't have the government and all these other organizations, going into the family at 6 weeks old and telling people how to do things. I mean, that's going to scare people off. It's going to turn people off. It's not going to get a productive result. But there is got to be a way where we can work with people to find out when children are in situations that are abusive or neglectful, or there's trauma in the family. And trauma doesn't have to be abuse. It can be things like stress. If the mom and dad are stressed and fighting with each other all the time and yelling with each other all the time, this has an effect on a 1 or 2-year-old because they're always uptight. They feel it. But, getting into this is something we're going to kind of not have a solution for, but that's some of this lead up is going to be towards that.
Mm-hmm. And so I do want to kind of highlight, there are some issues with the current investigative system when it comes to when people in Texas either report a child abuse case, or whether a mandated reporter kind of identifies and alerts CPS of a child abuse case. Some ideas of like types of mandated reporters, because you could be one and not know it. Well, no, I would actually guess that you would know it because this goes in with your training. Foster parents, school staff, school bus drivers, childcare staff, camp counselors, directors, administrators, coaches, medical and dental professionals are mandated reporters in the state of Texas. Substance abuse disorder treatment providers, mental health people, police, emergency medical technicians. So like firefighters would fall under that. Judges, district attorneys, court personnel, shelter staff, and then people who work in fields processing or monitoring print, film, or computer images. Y'all are mandated reporters, so that would pretty much be someone like me who does a lot of freelance writing and who does a lot of work for commercial companies trying to produce a few of their outputs. When we're looking through our, library of images, or if we're trying to use stock footage, we have to make sure that what we see is not illegal. And if it is illegal, then we need to report it. Religious clergy, volunteers, and then, of course, there's going to be other type of mandated reporters that are specific to, like, certain industries that are not listed in, like, all of these examples. But for the most part, I would think that technically we all have the responsibility to highlight when we fear that there is something wrong with the child, and to report it to the correct authorities. And then that's also the issue. How do you report the issue to CPS or to the police, or, what are the right steps to go about that route? So that is something that I do want to highlight on how to report a child abuse case. I'm not going to go through it right now, but that is something that I am going to link in the description of this episode on the Substack page. And so just a little bit about the mandated reporters and kind of just the PSA to these are the steps that you can take if you think that someone is if a child is in an abusive or neglectful situation. But also the next step, let's say that the child is removed from a home. There are a lot of issues with the foster care system, especially here in the state of Texas. But before I move on to that, did you want to highlight anything else?
Well, I'll come back to it. We're going to give a shout out to recognize a couple of organizations, both in Dallas and Tarrant County, that work with child abuse. And this is real hard. Our society is, everybody's to take care of themselves. That's pretty much ingrained to who we are in our country. So we don't like to interfere with other people's families. We get into, it's not my responsibility to worry about how so-and-so is raising their kids. And we've been that way for a long time. And a lot of it, it's just, the history of our country, because we were very agricultural dominated. So there was, a lot of distance between families. And so a lot of stuff, would never get reported. We're talking decades ago or a century ago. But as we've become more and more urban, more and more suburban, these things are more prominent. We see them more often. But still, we don't want to get into I don't really know if something's happening to anybody. I don't know, if I should get involved. And this is if you suspect something, but you're not sure, it's very hard for a person to step up. Now, teachers and child care providers, they've got a little bit more impetus to do it because it's part of their job.
Like, although there is, I understand what you're saying, but if my child is under the supervision of a teacher or an athletic coach or someone, camp or whatever, I expect them to tell me if there is something going on with other children bullying my kid, or if there's any sort of...
Oh, yeah. If it's your own child and you suspect it coming from the outside, you're very... you're going to act immediately.
Yeah.
But it's when you are the outside looking in that we have this hesitancy to address whether or not child abuse is going on. And it's hard because a lot of times you're guessing. You're not sure. You're only seeing symptoms of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it becomes very difficult for people to even think about reporting it. And again, so that's why some of these organizations and agencies running around are very important, because they give people who are unsure a resource of how to deal with it, or maybe who to contact to talk to someone about it.
So I do want to highlight some of the issues with the Texas foster care system. So the foster care system in Texas is called the Permanent Managing Conservatorship, which is just interchangeably used for foster care. For the purpose of this podcast, we're just going to say foster care. So the state system is in a crisis because there's so much litigation and court-ordered federal oversight of about 9,000 children in the foster care program. There's been a lot of litigation with the system simply because there are overburdened caseworkers who are in violation of court orders. It's hard to find placements for some of these kids. I don't know if you remember, but about 2 years ago, I think right after or right before COVID hit, there were some kids that were sleeping in CPS offices. And then there's also this practice of using unlicensed and quote-unquote dangerous out-of-state facilities for some of these kids to stay in for a short amount of time. So at hotels, at places outside of the state of Texas, at CPS offices. And so there's a lot of criticism and investigations going on to monitor what exactly is happening at the within the foster care system. And it's something that has been going on for at least 11 years in terms of the investigations, but the issues have been going on far longer than this. And even after 11 years, there's still very little to be done, or very little that has been done in terms of like policy change, in terms of like training more CPS workers, in terms of looking at the case studies. And I know it's hard to get people to on board on these jobs. It is a very emotionally tasking job. So I can understand why it's a little bit more difficult to have the right amount of caseworkers for the amount of children in Texas, because we are a big state that need foster care. But I still don't believe that's an excuse when there's many resources that the state of Texas can use in order to help these kids out. And it's just a matter of using those resources wisely and having this issue at the forefront of some of the policy decisions.
And I think going back to what we're trying to do in this podcast, we're not trying to espouse a liberal viewpoint or a conservative viewpoint. And there's, the Republican Party's supposed to espouse conservative public policy, and Democrats are supposed to espouse liberal public policies. Well, push that all aside, because what we really need is just good public policy. And this shouldn't be a liberal or conservative issue. This is an issue that affects families across the board, as we mentioned at the top. And so we just need better public policy. And it needs to be written by across the board. Doesn't matter who's in charge. Republicans or Democrats or independents, doesn't matter. This is an issue that public policy shouldn't be dominated by what your viewpoints are or how you lean left or right or whatever. This is an issue that everybody needs to get involved with to make better public policy. So one reason we're here is because there's not good public policy in Texas. And we always talk about, well, how do you do this? How do you pay for it? Well, we need to find a way.
Yeah. And so one of the things that would highlight a way to actually manage the treatment of foster kids' mental health better is to invest in those mental health services, so that when they do leave foster care, they're not without some sort of strong emotional, sociological foundation, so that they can live the rest of their lives without having to go through, or live the rest of their lives with tools to manage the issues that they had to go through throughout their entire childhood. Because once they hit 18, obviously a lot of them are adults, and they can't, just because you go from 17 to 18 within the matter of 24 hours doesn't mean that you're automatically capable of becoming a full adult human being and functioning in society. That's just not the case, especially if you had to deal with abuse and trauma. And so one of the things that we can do to make sure that some of these foster care issues, and hopefully get advocates of children who are in foster care to become advocates of more protective services, or not more protective services, but better protective services, is by giving those foster care children the tools to be able to function and to be able to have strong emotional grounding so that they can contribute in a meaningful way.
And that goes back to, I was talking about the history of our country. We always believe that you should be the type of person that pulls yourself up by your bootstraps.
Bootstraps, yeah.
And so if we're letting these kids fall behind because of trauma, it's not fair to them. If we say you need to be a self-made man or self-made woman nowadays, well then
nowadays, hell yeah, okay.
But if you want to, be successful, you need to have the tools to be successful. And if we're ignoring kids who are traumatized, abused, sexually abused, ignored in a foster care system, we are telling them, no, you don't deserve to be successful. And that's not right. If we're going to say what our values are in this country, we need to make sure they have the same opportunities as everyone else to be successful. And that's across the board. We're talking about children. They don't know until we teach them. And if we don't teach them, and if we don't help them, and if we don't show them the way, then we are hurting ourselves as a country. We are causing ourselves more cost in the long run if they cannot be successful, if they are struggling in life, if they cannot understand the importance of being able to make themselves successful, then we're failing them.
Just to reiterate, one thing we need to do is to invest in mental health services for people in foster care. The second thing that could definitely help move our foster care system along is trying to find out how we can keep caseworkers, because caseworker turnover is just disruptive, especially for the continuity. Is that a word? Continuity. I was like, I know that's a word, of relationships, and especially so that children can at least find someone to trust, if that makes sense. So now I'm reading from an organization that advocates for overhauling some of the policies that have been destructive in the child foster care system. And so one of the things that they highlight is definitely caseworker retention. And they say that they can do that by providing flexible scheduling, telecommunicating options, and opportunities for professional development and recognition, tools and resources to ensure reasonable caseloads and workloads, and then also address agency climate and cultural factors that undermines organizational commitment and job satisfaction. So again, the cultural climate of an organization will impact you as a worker. If you show up and you see that people don't care about the job simply because they're overworked and management of these caseworkers just don't care about the overwork, they're just trying to find output from these caseworkers instead of trying to make sure that they're doing something that is fulfilling for them. Because I imagine a lot of these caseworkers got into the business because they wanted to help kids. Now, that is just something I am totally guessing, but I highly think that would be the reason.
I would think you're right for a good majority of them.
Right. So it's sort of like if we can foster that community and that passion for protecting children, I'm sure people will stay. So there could be just issues within the agency, like work culture issues, where caseworkers are just seeing that management doesn't care, so they're like, fine then, I hate to leave these kids in danger, but if the workplace is toxic, then that's going to be an issue for the caseworker to produce work that is beneficial for the child.
Yeah, I agree there. And again, it goes back to, the state agencies, the county agencies, and they're all understaffed and overworked. It's a shame. How do we improve this? Of course, it's going to take some money. Where do you find the money? These are all, unfortunately, things we have to kind of plow through to get better results. Better results is not just arresting people for child abuse.
The money,
let's not look at it that way.
I was going to say the money is actually the least of my concerns, because when you actually look at a lot of the policies, we do have the money to fund them. It's just that the money is going to stupid things. Like it truly, we'll do a whole podcast episode on this so I can back up that claim to see where the money is going for policy and all that stuff. But sometimes I'll go through the Dallas City records and I'll see where taxes are being spent, and I am like, this is just one of those examples where when people complain about money is such a short-term issue. Money is one of those short-term election cycle things that people can run on and say they're spending too much money or they're taking away my tax money. That's not the issue. The issue is the fact that we're not using the tax money wisely. We have enough tax dollars to
address the issues.
Yeah, to address the issues. But the thing is, those tax dollars are being spent unwisely. Our people are running on these platforms about, tax dollars this, tax dollars that, whether you're Republican or Democrats, we need to use more tax money or they need to tax me less. That's not the issue. Yeah, everything is about, I don't want to say about the same, but the tax money thing isn't the issue. That's just one of these short-term election platforms that candidates can run on. We have the money to address the issues that we need to address. We just need to use it wisely.
Oh, I agree there. And again, what is success? And I was starting to get into that, it's not how many people we arrest for child abuse, because that tears into the, the county district attorney budget, because they have to go out and, prosecute more cases. It's to prevent it. And so some of this is involved in our society has another issue, being a parent. Being a parent's stressful. Most parents don't become parents to abuse their children, and most don't. But things happen, and we don't educate our parents. We don't educate ourselves on being parents well enough to understand when there's a stressful situation and they need to get help themselves. And that's, I don't want to say it's the root source of the problem, but it's another way to tackle the bigger picture, is to, if parents have a better understanding of how to be a better parent, that will reduce some of it. I mean, there's going to be a whole hodgepodge of things you're going to do because there's different causes for child abuse and sexual abuse. Some of it is that people are psychopathic. I mean, especially the sexual abusers. But other things that, again, back to trauma, back to stress, back to, neglect, they don't know. Sometimes they just don't know that this is not really beneficial for their child, and they need help in understanding that.
Mm-hmm. And so in addition to, we talked about increasing mental health resources, we talked about caseworker retention, we talked about the issue is not arresting more people, but rather giving parents the tools to be able to take care of their children and raise children in the society. And then another part is educating the public. There are a lot of people who are just not aware that this is an issue. I certainly was not aware of how big this issue was until I actually came across a Reddit thread that highlighted how child abuse statistics are rising, and not only how child abuse statistics are rising, but especially in the state of Texas, that there's an issue with our foster care system where in 2020, 100 kids died under state supervision or under the Texas foster care system. 2 of them were from COVID-19 deaths, but there was 6 from suicide, 2 or 4 from injuries within the family. And this is just deaths. This does not include the statistics that could be for child abuse within the foster care system, because that is definitely also an issue. So there is just this public awareness, education, public awareness, education, what's the word? I don't know what the word is, but we just need to raise awareness about this issue so that the more that people are aware of it, they know what to look out for. And then when you have that strength in knowing that these are the signs and issues that you need to look out for, and that you have a pathway to report these issues instead of feeling helpless, then that could be just, you could at least save one child, and that could make a world of a difference. So we are at 29 minutes. So was there anything else that you wanted to wrap up with?
Yes, we go back to, we don't want to support liberal or conservative causes, but I do want to recognize In Dallas, it's Dallas CASA, C-A-S-A. They are an organization that advocates for, protecting children. In Fort Worth, it's the Alliance for Children. Dallas CASA, it's the last weekend, but they're having a CASA parade at Playhouses.
Oh, they do this every year. Yeah, I remember.
And I think it's at North Park. Let me double check.
It is at North Park.
Yeah, so it ends tomorrow, the 31st. So they're not the cure-all here, but, there are organizations, and these are just two, because we kind of focus on the Dallas-Fort Worth area as much as possible, and, of course, surrounding counties. But we pulled these two up, and it's important, I think, if you want to educate yourself, if you want to find a way to help or at least learn or at least get, understand why this is an important topic, these are two starting points to get in touch with, to receive some education. Momentous Institute, I mentioned earlier, they do a lot of work with parent education.
The Byron Nelson is their big fundraising campaign.
Yeah, so these are good things, and you need to be aware of what the positive is behind this, because we've been talking a lot of negative. There are resources out in every community, not just Dallas-Fort Worth, and you need to look for these if you're so inclined. Mm-hmm. And hopefully this will give you a starting point to educate yourself a little bit more or find out more what you can do.
Right. And so this is something that I also want to highlight. There is a connection to politics with this issue. There is a connection with policy to this issue. Governor Abbott is one of the people, or a governor is one of the roles that oversees some of the policies that get done. The people in the House, the Texas House, people in the Texas House, people in the Texas State Legislature, these are the ones that do make the decisions about how much money should go towards foster care systems, how much money should go towards mental health resources for children in foster care, and can also provide some of the solutions to what's happening in our foster care system. So if you're not necessarily a political, go out and vote kind of person, sometimes it's these little issues, such as, it really is these little issues that can push one person to go vote. Especially, I've seen it happen with people who are worried about the environment, people who are worried about animal issues, people who are worried about dietary supplements and the way they affect people. And this is just another one of those policy issues that can definitely drive people to look in to see what exactly is happening and also become a more informed voter. So you were looking at me wanting to say something?
Well, I was going to go back to, you were bringing in all the Texas government. And it goes back to the department you mentioned earlier, the Department of Family and Protective Services. Mm-hmm. They're the agency that kind of run, I don't say run, but they're the ones that oversee some of the policies and are out there not advocating, they're just implementing the policies. So there's where you get your nuts and bolts into this, but it is the legislation and the governor who do create the policy.
Mm-hmm. So with that, we are going to wrap up this episode. I hope everyone has a good last few weeks of summer. Nothing's changed for me in terms of my schedule, except that it just keeps getting busier. But, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So I hope everyone has a great rest of the week.